Today's daf is daf Pei Beis in Zbachim, as we learn for Achenu based on Sunnah Sarv Shivya, and as we learn for Shleim from Moshe Yaakov ben Hanasheva. It says the Gemara 3 lines from the top of the page. Now, what do we have here? We had a machlokes yesterday in the Mishnah near the end of Pei Aleph and Beis. When talking about the not only we're talking about the karbonos that were mixed up, but we also have another issue that if you have, let's say, Mishnah said, what do? You throw them all out. That's what I said. What's the problem over here? If you have karbonos that are supposed to be brought inside the heichal, like parmenas rafim, which is par kohen gadol, par that the kohen gadol brings, we call that the par kohen mashiach if he sinned, or par davashal tzibor, as well as the karbonos of Yom Kippur. Those karbonos are brought inside the heichal, and on Yom Kippur even inside the kodesh kodashim, called panima. So what happens if you mix those up? You got to throw them out. Rabbi Kiva says that if you did it first outside and you brought it on the inside, by other karbanos. Why? Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva held that the pasuk that we quoted yesterday, we're going to talk about that pasuk again today in detail. Pasuk is called chatas asher yuva midama, any carbon chatas that you bring from its blood into the Oel Moed, into the heichal, lechaper bakodesh, to atone, lo should not be eaten by ishtisarif. In other words, it's puzzle, right? It's puzzle if you bring it inside. Now, Rabbi Kiva says,
what Sedra is that?
Pardon?
Sedra. What Sedra is?
What Sedra? This is in Tzav, in Vayikra Perek Vav Pasik Chav Gimel. So you can't bring a chatos into the, obviously, the chatos apnimios, you bring the dam in, but we're talking about a chatos chitzona, a chatos that's brought outside. If you bring, you're supposed to bring a chatos chitzona, like a regular chatos, you sin. You bring a chatos like his ira, you can't bring that inside the heichal. So what about other karbanos? Rabbi Kiva says it applies to other karbanos too. Other karbanos whose place is outside, you don't bring them inside. The Chum say machshira, except for the case of chatos. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Kiva Omer kol damim shenichnasu lechaper beheichal psulin. No, chatas bulvad. Rabbi Lezer says Asham is also like chatas because the pasuk gets chatas kashim. So we have this famous machlokas between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. Does the Isser, if you bring a carbon inside the heichal that doesn't belong there, and that means it's puzzle if you offer it inside instead of outside, is that applies to all karbonos outside or only the chatas, according to Rabbi Lezer, chatas and Asham? So this is the discussion. Amar Rabbi Yehuda on the third, fourth line on Pei Zamar Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel. Mashal ma davar domer. What's the mashal of Rabbi Kiva when he says this? What's it comparable to? He says it's comparable to this when he says not only chatos but all karbanos that belong outside. If you bring them inside the puzzle, it's comparable to a Talmud shemazig l'Rab Bochanan. He mixed a cup of wine for his Rebbe with warm water. That's how the Rebbe wanted it. And then the Rebbe said, V'amar mazogli. And then the Rebbe said, notice he was serving him a hot drink, call it hot tea. And then his Rebbe said, mix for me another one. Mix for me. Amar lo bama. So he said, well, what do you want it with now? Do you want it with hot or cold? Amar lo b'chamen anu asukim. We're already talking about, till now I've been drinking hot, you keep feeding me hot. So now that I've said specifically, give me a mixed drink, I mean to include more things. Because we've already been drinking, like you've been drinking hot all day. You want another one, and he says, mix me another drink, mix me a drink. So he's, what do you mean, mix me a drink? You're trying to say, besides the stuff that you've been getting till now, you mix me a drink. So I meant whether it's cold or hot, not dafka. That's the mushal of, that's what he wants to compare. Now, mushal, you can argue with it, as we'll see. So, hachanami, michli b'chatas askin, we're talking about a chatas, right? We're talking about a chatas. So we're talking about a chatas. V'asi. Michdi b'chatas askin avasi. Our discussion is about chatas. Chatas because of Rahman al-Amli. If you're talking about chatas, why did it say chol chatas asher? Why did it say kol chatas? What do you tell me chol chatas? We're already talking about chatas. L'Amli el alav chatas ka'amina la. Lav chatas kamina ela lav chatas kamina. I'm not talking about chatas ela kol kachim. In other words, we're already talking about chatas. So you told me new halacha now. Can't bring it inside. Why do you mention chatas? Doesn't mean chatas. We're already talking about chatas. Since you mentioned chatas, you're trying to say no, not dafka chatas, but all kachim. That's the example. That's how Rabbi Kiva learns. That's what we're assuming right now. Now this is debatable. This example. Since we're talking about chatas, why mention chatas? You mention chatas to include other ones. Yeah, you can argue with that svara, right? As we'll see. Maskavula, Rav Huna, Breda Yeshua, Michdi. What do you mean? Osibuli kol Isrubu kol kochim l'gab mizbeach. All the karbanos l'gab mizbeach. The previous pasuk said kli cheres asher tivu shabal. If you cook any carbon in an earthenware pot, so the earthenware pot has to be destroyed because it has absorbed the kochim. You can't use that again, right? But if it's a metal pot like kli nechoshes, then you cook the kochim in there. Then you should scour it and rinse it. Okay, so it says Michti. We've been talking about all kachim marika v'shtifa regarding scouring and rinsing. Chatas kas rachman. So why mention chatas? We're talking about all kachim over here. Shma mina chatas ain't midiyachir lo. So he says just the opposite. Why say we're talking about chatas? Yeah, that parsha is talking about chatas. But the pasuk right before, two pasukim right before kol chatas yeshiv medame el moed l'chaper v'kodesh. It said, we're talking about Marik and Shtifa of all karbanos. Why did it mention Chatas here? So I could say this for, I can reverse this for. Elamai, if you want to give an example to say how you're learning, I'll give you an example to show you the other way. You're saying an example of Rav Akiva indicates that when it says kol chatas, it means all karbanos, not dafka chatas. I'll give you a different example. A Talmud was giving his Rebbe mixing drinks for him, let's say mixing water with wine, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. He gave him both kinds. He says, no, I only want warm now. So only, in other words, all kinds were being given. And now the Rebbe said to him, no, dafka this one, meaning we've been talking about all karbanos in terms of Marik and Shtifa. You have to clean, you have to scour and rinse all pots that you cooked kachim in. And then it says, kol chatas yashiv midama. If a chatas goes into the heichal, it's got to be destroyed as puzzle. So obviously, we're only talking about chatas now, because it mentioned, until now we're talking about all karbanos, and I mentioned chatas. Ella, so the reason of Rav Akiva is not this svara that you say, what we were talking about before, what does it mean now? Does it mean to include everything or not? All the time Rav Akiva, mechatas kol chatas. The pasuk says, kol chatas. It doesn't say chatas hashivna. It says kol chatas, all chatas, right? The Tanya chatas, ain't li el chatas. Kashi kachim. How do I know all kashi kachim that come into the base, come into the heichal, that belong outside? You brought them inside. How do I know that they're all puzzle? Talmud lomer kol chatas. Kachim kalam and havara kachim kalam. Talmud lomer kol chatas. So kol teaches me kashi kachim, which is what I would expect first. That's the holier one, and then it's v'chol chatas teaches me even kachim kalam. That's where Rav Akiva's for. That's where Rav Akiva says, Kol Chatashim Dama, any carbon goes in there. Amalo, Rav Yosei Aglili, so Rav Yosei Aglili argued with Rav Akiva. He held like the Rabbanan, but we'll see. He is a complicated svar. We're at the first of the wide lines now in the Gemara. Amalo Rav Yosei Aglili, Rav Yosei Aglili said to him, Afilu atamar b'kol hayom kulo. Even if you say that you're trying to include more things, not only chatas, but the kol and the dikol, I don't listen to you. Ela chatas ainli, ela, learn it this way. Chatas ainli, ela chatas yachid. Chatas means maybe chatas of yachid, like his asira. Chatas sibur, and how do I know chatas sibur also that belongs on the outer mizbeach? If you brought it inside, it's puzzle. Talmud lomer kol chatas, it includes that. Ainli, ela chatas zocher, only if it's a male. Chatas nekeva menayin. How do I know the chatas if it's an nekeva also? Talmud lomar v'chol chatas. In other words, I'll tell you that kol includes that we're only talking about chatas. Kol includes kol includes even chatas of a tzibur, and vikol includes whether it's a male or female. So it's more a klapilai. Where are you going with this? A standard chatas is a nekeva. It's a kizbur asira. So what do you mean includes more? The opposite, the basic chatas is a kizbira. Ela hachakamer ainli ela chatas nekeva, which is a standard chatas zocher like that of a nasi a menayin tamalam v'chol chatas. So that's how Rabbi Yosei Aglili says, I disagree with you, Rabbi Akiva, in terms of your drasha. You're saying kol v'kol includes all kinds of kavanos. I say kol v'kol includes all kinds of chatas only. Says more. So Rabbi Yosei Aglili high svar. Does he hold to this? Does he think this pasuk comes to tell me this idea that kol chatas includes chatas? V'atani Rabbi Yosei Aglili Omer. This whole parsha is not talking about regular chatas. It's talking about the chatas, the parmas rafim and the sirmas rafim, the ones that, like we mentioned, the parko Mashiach, the parko Gadol, the parma of Yom Kippur, and the sorry of Yom Kippur, and the sorry of that they sinned in avodah zarah. We're talking about parmas that are not eaten, that are burnt, right? Lisro pesulena basically. Tell me this: where do you normally burn these karbanos? The part of Masrafim, Sir Masrafim, you burn them outside of all the machnos, meaning outside of the Azora, outside of Harabais, and outside of Yerushalayim. The three machnos, right? The machne kahuna is in the Azora, machne Levi is on Harabais, machne Yisrael is all of Yerushalayim. You have to burn it. The normal way is you burn it properly. You burn it outside of Yerushalayim. However, if it became puzzle in the Beis Hamikdash, you did some psul, you had a pigul or whatever happened to it, you burn it a Beis Abira in the fireplace that's in the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, we said there's different places where they burn things. There's a Makom Hadeshin next to the Kevesh. Remember, where the Trumas Hadeshin every morning ashes are taken there and they're distributed. They're put down in that spot right near the Kevesh on the right side of the Kevesh on the eastern side, about 10 amos in from the beginning of the ramp, beginning of the Kevesh, and they're burnt there. And that's also the place where the Kohen who does the Olas Oaf takes the crop and the feathers and throws it that long distance and it lines there too. That's the Makom Hadeshin or Beis Hadeshin. The pasuk calls it Makom Hadeshin. Then there's a fireplace where they burn karbanos that became puzzle in the Beis Hamikdash. Some mistake was made, like this. That's what we're talking about. You burn them. Then there's a place. There's another place on Harabais that they burn certain karbanos, and then there's a place outside of Yerushalayim that they burn karbanos. That's the way you normally do Parnas Rafim, Sinus Rafim. They're burned outside of the whole El Michutz Lamachaneh. So here he's telling you, Rav Yossi says, this pasuk is not talking about regular chatas at all. It's talking Parnas Rafim, Sinus Rafim, telling you that if it became puzzle, you burn in the Beis Hamikdash, right? V'lamed below saseh chilaso. And tell you that there's a lo saseh. Obviously, they're not supposed to be eaten. You're supposed to burn it. But here he's telling you that what? The pasuk is lo seichel, don't eat it. So he's talking about Parnas Rafim, Sinus Rafim. That's how Rabbi Yossi learns. He doesn't learn this pasuk at all. Amrulo, chatas shenichnas dam milfnai b'lefim minayin. So how do you know that a regular chatas that went inside the heichal, as we'll see, or inside the Kodesh Kodeshim? How do you know it's possible? Hein lahuva, hein lahuva. So he said, no, I learned from the pasuk. Remember when Moshe Rabbeinu had a discussion with Aaron. Why did your boys burn this carbon, this chatas sa'ir? Why did they burn it? After all, it wasn't brought into the basin. It wasn't brought into the heichal, which would disqualify it. So you see from that pasuk, from the dialogue of Moshe and Aaron, that you're not supposed to bring a chatas in there. So Rabbi Yossi learns out that you don't bring into that disqualifies any chatas or a carbon that you bring out, or a chatas only that you bring inside the heichal is disqualified from the pasuk of hein lahu vasdama, not from the chol chatas sheshuv midama. So Rabbi Yossi doesn't learn this from chatas and kol chatas. The answer is Ledvar of Rabbi Kiva Kamar. You're right. Hitaka learns out that you can't bring a chatas into the heichal from where? From the dialogue of Moshe and Aaron. But he was just answering Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva, you say that the word v'chol chatas comes to include not only what? Not only a chatas, but also kachim kalam, and also kachim and also kachim kalam. No, I'll say chatas and the whole chatas could come to include different kinds of a chatas. You could have a chatas nekeva, a chatas zochar, a chatas of 8 sibur, right? You learn it out from there. So he was just arguing with Rabbi Kiva. He's saying the way you're learning kol chatas isn't proper, but he himself learns the drasha that a chatas cannot be brought or cannot be brought into the heichal, and that would disqualify from the discussion of Moshe and Aaron of hein lahu vesdama el kodesh apnimi. Right? I'm always misquoting the pasuk. I don't remember the pasuk offhand. That's what that was the argument that Moshe had with hein lahu vesdama ksiv gabesor chatas. Rashi says in the first of the white lines in Rashi, shesafar b'nei v'kom Moshe hein lahuva esdama. Hahuva esdama mashma would be possible. You should then you would have had a burn. In other words, why did they burn it? It wasn't like their dam was brought inside the heichal, which would disqualify it, and that's what we're talking about here. This pasuk says, "B'chol chatas yashiuva midama." The blood comes in. We're going to talk about all these rushes in a few more minutes. Okay, says the Mishnah, "Chatas shekibel dama." Now, as we said, everybody agrees, even Rav Akiva, even the Rabbanan, that a chatos, that dam was brought inside the heichal, chatas achitzoni, that's supposed to be brought outside. A regular chatas, you bring the carbon chatas via sinned, and you brought the dam was brought inside the heichal, that ruins it. It's disqualified. It's puzzle. Okay. We also know that dam that was taken outside the azara, let's say before sprinkling it, they took it outside the azara. That dam is no good. However, we're going to see here in the Mishnah, there's a difference between taking something inside the heichal and taking something outside the azara. Let's say you were makabel the dam in two different cups. You had two different cups of dam. If you did shchita, you did kabbalah in two different cups. Yatsa echem lechutz, and one of the cups was taken outside the azara. Hapnimi kosher. That doesn't ruin the whole carbon. Listen to this carefully, because we're going to have the whole discussion about this. We have to understand these rules. If you had two cups of blood and one cup was taken outside the azara, the other one's okay. You can continue the process with the one that's inside. However, if you had two cups of blood and one was taken inside the heichal, then the whole carbon is puzzle. Based on this pasuk, so again, the inside is kosher, the other coast is okay. But if one of the two cups went inside the heichal, Rabbi Yosei Glili says it's kosher, machshir. He says that's still okay. The same rule applies, inside or outside. Machshir b'chitza. Right, Rabbi Yosei Glili says machshir b'chitza. In other words, the one that wasn't taken inside, the one that's still in the azor is okay. The chachamim postim, the chacham we pass like the chacham say, it's puzzle. It's puzzle in that case. In other words, the chacham say again. Listen, understand this clearly. You have two cups of blood from the same carbon. If one of the bloods was taken outside the azara, you could still use the other one, no problem. The one outside you can't use, but the one inside you can continue. But if one of those cups was taken inside the heichal, then the whole puzzle, the whole carbon is no good. This pasuk of kolchatas Shiur midama, some of its blood. That's the drasha of the Chachamim. Rabbi Yosei Glili disagrees. He says that both kosher. We'll see more of the discussion in the Gemara. But first, Rabbi Yosei Glili tells you his basic kal v'chomer right here. Rabbi Yosei Glili. Ma'im b'makom shemachshava poslin b'chutz. Remember, what's pigel? If you had a machshava, you're going to eat it chutz l'zman, right? Or chutz l'makam. Chutz l'zman is chorus. Chutz l'makam is pigel without the chorus. It's still puzzle, right? I had a machshava, then we're going to eat it outside the azara. So marach, a place where machshava ruins it, but which is what b'chutz. Lo asa has a mashuyir kiyotze. The one cup that was left inside is not like the one that left. In other words, marach outside the azara, which is really bad. Why? Because a machshava just on the outside is going to ruin it. Yet if I actually took a cup outside, the one that remains inside is okay. Makom she'ena machshava poselas, a place where a machshava doesn't pass. Meaning, let's say you had a machshava, you're going to offer it inside. You shechted the carbon and you did the kabbalah, and you had a machshava that you're going to bring it inside the eichel. Machshava like that doesn't ruin it. So makom she'ena machshava poselas b'fnim ein adin shelo nasa es hamashuyir kenechus. So the one that's left outside shouldn't make like inside. In other words, Rabbi Yosei Glili is defending his position. Whether a cup was taken outside or a cup was taken inside, you can't use that cup, but it doesn't ruin the whole carbon. Ma'adach in a place where outside, which is a pigel, if you had a machshava outside where a machshava ruins it, right? Doesn't ruin the carbon. If you took a cup of dam outside, you could still use the other one inside. So in a place inside, meaning inside the heichal, where a machshava of heichal that I'm going to take doesn't ruin it. So certainly, if I put a cup in there, it shouldn't ruin the one that wasn't taken in, right? So that beinadin shalonasa mashuyir kenichnas, right? Kenichnas. So that was his argument. That was his argument. He had a kal v'chomer, and we're going to see more kal v'chomers later on. But these are all discounted by the psukim. Now nichnas l'chaper. When we said if you take the dam inside the heichal, it ruins the carbon. It says if you take it in to atone, af bishlo keeper. And as you took it into inside the heichal with a machshava, you're going to sprinkle it, let's say, on the small mizbeach inside the heichal. You had a machshava, even though you didn't do it, it's still puzzle. Divrei Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says no. Ad she'achaper. It's only if you took the dam inside and you actually sprinkled it with the intention of atoning. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in ichnes shogeg kosher. If you took it in by mistake, you inadvertently took the dam inside, it's kosher. Kol adam sulin, all puzzle dam, shenaslo gam mizbeach, lo hurtza. Even though we'll see that many karbonos that are puzzle, if you put it on the mizbeach, like the meat or something of that sort, you don't take it down, the meat or the emur puzzle, but it's not machaper for you. So any dam which is puzzle you put on the mizbeach, it's not maratzi, you still didn't get your kapara. Lo hurtza, it's the tzitz, the Kohen Gadol's gold plate that he wears on his forehead that says Kodesh Lashem. It's not maratza. It does not help that carbon be accepted by God. Ela ala tame. It's only maratza for tuma. Shatzitz maratza ala tame, ve'ena maratza ala yotze. It's only maratza for tuma if the carbon became tame or the kohen was tame. It's maratza for that, but it's not maratza for a carbon that became puzzle. Let's say by leaving the Beis Hamikdash. Tanya Rabbi Yosei Glili. So now we're going to see more of the Bryce of more Rabbi Yosei Glili's arguments. Again, what's the basic machlokas? Understand something. We have to understand that Mishnah. If you took a cup, you had 2 cups of blood from one carbon, you could be zorek either one. If you took one of them outside the azara, doesn't ruin the carbon. You could still use the inside one. What you took outside can't be used, but the one that remains, the remaining one is okay. But if I took one of the cups inside the heichal, right, that ruins the whole thing. The remaining cup is no good. That's what the Chacham say. Basically, says no, the remaining cup is good. Tanya We're going to have. He's going to say a bunch of kal v'chomers. Kal v'chomer. Listen, look at this. Again, this is the kal v'chomer that he said in the Mishnah. Manach, a place where machshava poselas b'chutz. Right, if you had machshava chutz l'zman or chutz l'makom, that ruins it. Lo pasal dam shebchutz. Lo pasal dam shebachutz es shebefnim. The dam that went outside does not ruin the remaining blood inside. You could still use that. Makom she'ein machshava poselas, a place where machshava doesn't ruin. You had a machshava, you're going to take it inside the heichal. Doesn't ruin it there. Befnim and initially of dam shebefnim es shebachutz. So the dam that was taken inside certainly shouldn't ruin the bad one. In a place where outside, where machshava ruins it, if you take it outside the azara, it doesn't ruin it. If you actually took 1 cup outside, doesn't ruin the remaining cup. So a place like inside the heichal, where machshava doesn't ruin it, certainly if you took 1 cup in, it shouldn't ruin the remaining blood. Amalei, the rabbis answer, you're right. You got a nice kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer, you could say svaras back and forth. I got a pasuk. Harei omer ashayuva midama. Right, I feel mixes dama. It says any carbon, kol chatz ashayuva, any part of its blood came inside the heichal is ruined. Right, the pasuk says not only shouldn't you eat it. Not only shouldn't you eat it, it's got to be burnt. It's totally disqualified. Okay, that was what they answered. So Rabbi Yosef says, okay, kal v'chomer leyotzeh. If that's how you learned, that what? That any dam that was taken inside the heichal ruins even the remaining blood that wasn't inside the heichal. Now I'll give you kal v'chomer the other way. I'll tell you that yotzeh also should be no good. You said, you agreed that dam, if you had 2 cups and 1 cup was taken outside the azar, it doesn't ruin the one inside. Now I'll say the kal v'chomer the other way, that should be ruined. Machshav doesn't ruin if you had a machshav that you're going to take it inside. Posel dam shebefnim es shebachutz. But if you took dam inside 1 cup, ruins the remaining one. Makom shemachshava posel is a place where machshava does ruin it. Bachutz, you had a machshava, you're going to eat it. You're going to eat it outside the azara. And a din sheposel dam shebachutz es shebefnim. So if you took 1 cup outside, that should also ruin the one inside. And there you say it doesn't ruin it. Amulo, the answer in Harei Omer, Asher Yuva. It says if it's brought in, Yuva means brought in, not taken out. Kol chatas Yuva midam. Hanichnas posel and yotze posel. Again, a pasuk trumps a kal v'chomer. That's the idea. No matter what, you could say all as far as you want. Pasuk trumps that. And yotze posel. So it goes on. The te machshava. So maybe if you had a machshava that you're going to eat it inside the heichal, maybe that should ruin it. Mikal v'chomer. The puzzle that if you took dam outside, it doesn't ruin it. Shebefnim machshava posels. Machshava does puzzle. If you had a machshava, you're going to take it outside. Machshava poselas b'chutz. Makom sheposel dam shebefnim. Where dam, if you take it inside, ruins the remaining one. Es shedam b'chutz. The one that you took inside ruins the one that's outside. And a din shete machshava posel. Certainly machshava should ruin there too. So if you had a machshava, you're going to take it inside. That should ruin it. Harei Omer. No, it says when it talks about pickle, it says vayoma shlishi, and the darshan makom shu b'shulish b'dam b'basar uvein murim. A place that's what that's trifold. Excuse me. Trifold, meaning, what do you mean that? It's like a trifold, not the trifold they give out here in the shul. It's a trifold that it's a place. It's a place that has 3 things, meaning you bring the dam and you eat the basar and they murim. That's all in the outer, in the azara, right? You makriv the dam on the outer mizbeach. Dam is makriv on the inner mizbeach, right? We do sprinkle dam on the inner mizbeach by all the karbanos on the side and side, but you don't eat the basar there. You eat the basar in the azara, and the murim is certainly only burnt on the outer one. So the answer is that you want to learn from a kal v'chomer that if you had a machshava that you're going to bring it inside, it should be also like pigel, like outside, like you had a karbana of eating it outside the azara. Pigel is only applies to karbanos that we're talking about a place. It's only a place outside of a place where you have all 3 things. You're makriv the dam, you eat the basar, and you're makriv the emurim, and therefore that only applies to outside, like in the azara. So you had a machshava, you're going to take it outside of there. So the Gemara says, okay, the second line on Amid Beis now. Below te machshava posels machutz. So maybe machshava should not ruin it. Pigel should not be. If you had a machshava, you're going to eat it outside the azara. Mikal v'chomer. Ma makom sheposel dam shebefnim. Eshe b'chutz marach in a place where if you took one cup inside, the heichal that ruins the outside one, ein machshava poselis, a machshava on the inside doesn't ruin it, b'fnim. Makom shalo, right? Machshava you're going to bring inside doesn't ruin it. Makom shalo, as you just said, mashulish, it's got to be a place that has all three things. In the inner mizbeach, there is no eating basar and there is no emurim there burned. Right? Makom shalo pasal dam shebachutz. If you took one cup outside and it doesn't ruin the inside one, Ein adin shali a pasol machshava v'chutz machshava shouldn't ruin it. Talmud shlishi, we learn from that shlishi chutz l'zmano and pickle chutz l'mkomo. That whether it's chutz l'zmano or chutz l'makom, they're both pasol, except the first one is with chorus, second one's without chorus. Again, we have a pasuk. Okay, chutz l'mkomo. Basar hayotze l'chutz pasol. Okay, let's say you took basar meat of a carbon outside the azar, that's pasol. Hanichnas lefnim kosher, but if you took it inside the heichal, the meat is kosher. What are the pasuk? Pasuk says dama chol chatas sheshiv midama. Shehei b'den. I would say shepasul. I would think that the one inside is pasul. Why? If I took one cup outside, it doesn't ruin the one inside. Basar hayotze lechutz, which is pasul. But pasul basar hayotze lechutz pasul. Makam shepasul dam shebefnim. If taking the dam inside, it ruins the one that's outside. That's shebechutz. So basar nachnos lefnim anything should certainly ruin the whole thing. In other words, if you took the basar outside, the carbon's pasul, right? So why do you say it's outside? Just the opposite. Say a kal v'chomer. Again, what's the kal v'chomer, right? Hanichtas v'im kosher. If you took them outside, I would say pasul. Why? Makom shelo pasul dam shebechutz eshe b'fnim. Dam that was taken outside doesn't ruin the other cup that's inside. Basar ayotze lechutz. But if the basar went outside, is pasul, that ruins the carbon, right? Makom shepasul dam shebefnim eshe b'chutz. A place where taking the dam inside ruins them outside. Basar nechsafim certain in addition. So Harayot pasuk says midama. Again, we're quoting this pasuk. Kol chatas asher yuvra midama, from its blood. Not all the blood, even some of the blood, but only dama, only blood. Only if you take the blood inside does that ruin the carbon. Or midama dama v'lo basar. Kavachom re'atos, I'll say kavachom the other way. Mamakom shepasul dam shebefnim esh b'chutz. If you took dam inside one cup, the one outside is pasul. Right, basar nichlas lefnim kosher. Still, the basar taken inside is kosher. So makom shelo pasal dam shebechutz shevnim. When you took one cup outside the azara, it doesn't ruin the one inside. Basar yes lechutz and a din kosher should be kosher. Harei omer. The pasuk says ubasar basadet treifalo sochelu, and they darshan from that pasuk. If you look in the in Rashi, the top Rashi actually in the top line, basar hayotzu lechutz basal. The basar basar nafkol and kaman, which is what we're saying over here, and right here we're saying here the Rashi in the fourth line in Rashi from the top of the page, basara below mechitza, a place that's outside the partitions, mashma the v'darish lei l'chol basar, any basar that needs a mechitza. If it's taken outside, it's like a treifa, and you can't eat it. So again, all these kal v'chomers are slugged up by the pasuk. Kiven shiatza. Basar chutz l'mechitzaso nesar. It's all the carbon is pasul. Okay. Now, Tana Rabbanan. We're at the Tana Rabbanan for a few minutes at least. We don't have a kal v'chomer. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. About halfway down on the page on Amid Beis. Penima. Right. Pasuk said by Moshe Rabbeinu says Hein lohuva es dama penima. Right. The dam hasn't been taken all the way inside. So why did you burn the carbon? As if to say, if you took the dam inside, it would ruin it. So it says like this. Penima Rashi says, Ein li'ela shenichnas dama lefnai v'lefnim, because it's Hein lahuva dama penima. As we said, there's two psukim. There's basar basar there's the pasuk of chol dam v'chol chol chata shiv midama el oel moed l'chapar kodesh l'sechel. Oel moed means the heichal. But by Moshe Rabbeinu's discussion with Aaron, it says Hein lahuva dama penima. Wasn't taken inside. Inside sounds like the Kodesh Kodeshim. So Tana Rabbanan. Penima, ein ela penima. That's all mean Kodesh Kodeshim. Hechamanan, how do I know that if it was taken inside the Echel also possible? Talmud Lomer, ela Kodesh Penima. It says, hein lo Kodesh Penima. Right, ela Kodesh Penima. Where is that pasuk? Those of you who have a Gemara that quotes the exact pasuk, tell me the pasuk. It says here Vayikra, is that Vayikra Yud or Vayikra Vav? I can't even tell from the small letters. It's Yud.
It's missing from Vayikra.
What? Oh, the whole thing is missing?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay, right? Let's see.
Yeah.
Which pasuk is it?
Yud?
No, it's Parak Yud. Which pasuk is it? Is it also pasuk Yud? Well, what? Okay. In any case, it says, "Hey, oh, here it is. It's pasuk Yud Ches." Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Why did they burn it? Hein lahu v'stoma el kodesh pinima." It wasn't taken into the kodesh. Kodesh sounds like heichal. Pinima means all the way inside, right? He says, "Why it wasn't taken inside? So why didn't they eat it?" That's what he told him. As if to say, if it was taken all the way inside, it would be puzzle. So here again, Tan Rabban in the Gemara. Penima, ainly el penima, that's in the Kodesh Kodeshim, Heicham and Ayin Tamalomer el Kodesh Penima. Okay? So the Gemara says, why does it say both? In order to get into the Kodesh Kodeshim, you first have to go through the Heichal, right? So why does it have to say, and the Heichal is also puzzle. So V'yomar Kodesh, what does it have to go all the way inside? It's puzzle as soon as you go into the Heichal. Amarava, the answer is the word Penima and the word Kodesh could both be referring to the Heichal. The fact that you have two tells me one is a Heichal, one is a Kodesh Kodeshim. Meaning, if I wouldn't have both, I would say that maybe it's only if you go into the Kodesh Kodeshim, but not if you go into the Heichal itself. Only by the Heichal, maybe it wouldn't possible. The fact that you have two words teaches me that it includes both the Heichal. What's that? You know, if you're a Kohen, you can eat truma. Your family could eat truma. Your Evet Kanani could eat truma because you own his body. If you have an Evet Ivri, can he eat truma? No, he cannot. Okay. Pasuk says Tosha v'Sachir lo yochal. They're not allowed to eat the kodesh, and we're referring to over there to the truma and ochal. The truma she'ein gufo kana the kohen. He's not own. Now, what would you say? Listen carefully. An Evet Ivri. How long is an Evet Ivri an Evet for? 6 years. If he gets his ear pierced, yeah. How long you say till Yovel? Now, if the pasuk would say that an Evet Ivri that's there for Yovel, he's like a permanent Evet Ivri, he can't eat truma because you don't really own him. If it would say that, wouldn't it be obvious that if he's only an Evet for 6 years, that he certainly wouldn't be able to eat? If an Evet that you have for 50 years, right, or up to 50 years cannot eat, it's not considered yours, he can't eat the truma, so certainly an Evet only for 6 years. But the pasuk says both. Tosha v'Sachir, a person who's just resident with you or a hired hand, it says they cannot eat. Now, why does it have Tosha and Sachir? The answer is because if I'd only have one, I would say which one can't eat? The 6-year guy, but the 50-year guy, maybe he could eat. Just like Toshav and Sach. We have this in many places in Shas. The Tanya, Toshav Zeh Koni Koni Olam. Toshav is a person who had an Evet Ivri who had his ear pierced. He's there for Olam, meaning until Yovel. Sachir Zeh Koni Koni Sham, only for 6 years. So Yomer Toshav, Val Yomer Sachir. So just say the Toshav, the one who's there for 50 years. Vani Yomer Kenya Olam Ein Ochel. Marach, he's your Evet for 50 years. That's pretty permanent. Still, he can't eat. Koni Koni Shanam Lo Koshkein. Right, so why does it have to say both of them? The answer is Ilu Kain. If we would only say one of them, if we would only say Tosha, I would say, what is a Tosha? That he's only there for 6 years. Maybe Tosha means he's just there for 6 years. Maybe I think he could eat. So Bas Sachir, therefore it says Sachir and Toshav to teach me. Sachir is 6 years, Toshav is 50 years. The limit al Toshav, Shazek Koni Kini Olam, the Zek Koni Kini Shanim, and both of them don't eat. So now there's the same thing over here. If it would only say Kodesh and not Penima, I would say what? Kodesh means the Heicha, the Kodesh Kodeshim. Maybe if you take it into the Kodesh Kodeshim, then the carbon is possible. But if you only took it into the Heicha, it's not. So it tells you both. It tells you Kodesh and Penima to tell me that Penima means Kodesh Kodeshim and Kodesh means the Heicha. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye turned to Rav and said, right? Rav says, no, Bishlam Asam, I understand the case of the Eved, Hare, Trey Gufa, there's two different people. One is a 6-year guy, one's a 50-year guy. The Afagav, the Havele, Lekra, Lemechta of Nirtza. Had the Pasuk said, a Nirtza, a pierced guy, cannot eat, that would have been obvious too. Kalvachomer, still Lo Yochel. Had it said Nirtza Lo Yochel, and obviously a 6-year guy couldn't eat a kavachomer. You could say that the pasuk could have said nirtza, and then I wouldn't have had to say Toshav and Sacher, but still Milsar Asim Kavachomer, the Pasuk said it. Elahacha, if it could have just said Heichal, and if it becomes possible by going into the Heichal, obviously it becomes possible going into the Kodesh Kodeshim, because you can't get to the Kodesh Kodeshim without going through the Heichal first. It's obvious. Elahacha, Kivan the Ifsil Beheichal, my boy. Once it becomes possible by going into the Heichal, what does that tell you? It becomes possible in the Kodesh Kodeshim. It already became possible when you went into the Heichal. There's only one way to go into the Kodesh Kodeshim, apparently, through the Heichal. If he came in through a circuitous route, what does that mean? He came into the Kodesh Kodeshim via the roof, by the ceiling, the way the workers were lowered in there, right? So it's possible that go into the Kodesh Kodeshim without going through the Heichal. So I have to tell you, whether you went into the Heichal or you went into the Kodesh Kodeshim directly through some circuitous route, either way, it's possible. It says coming in. You're walking, you come to Hava sounds like, right, that's the regular way. Hava means coming in the normal way. Rashi says, where's the Rashi here? Yeah, V'haboksiv mashma umashma delo mifsal ela derech haba, the normal way to come in, not by being lowered through the roof. So that doesn't make sense. Amalei Rava v'haboksiv ela amarava kol midi the choshev aleh lefnai v'lefnim lo mifsal mehechel. You know why he tells you over here that to tell you that only if you come in, but it means to tell you this. If you were thinking, let's say when you brought the chatas in, your plan is to go into the Kodesh Kodeshim, and you didn't get there. You only went into the Heichal, it doesn't become possible there. That's the Chiddush. Kol midi, the choshev l'fnayim, your machshava was to go all the way inside. It doesn't become possible. And you stop for some reason, you didn't fulfill your wishes, it doesn't become possible. In other words, if you plan to bring it into the Heichal, and you come into the Heichal, it's a puzzle. If you plan to go to Kodeshim, it's possible. If you plan to go into Kodeshim and you didn't go in there, you only went into Heichal, it doesn't become possible. Why? That's learned out from the fact that it says Kodesh Panima. You had to have a kavanah for Kodesh or for Panima. But if you had a kavanah for Panima and you only went into the Kodesh, that doesn't ruin it. It says Rashi. There's a Rashi here. Let's see. There's a Rashi. Elam Rabba Olam. Rashi says Lolam Da'alei Derech Psachim became in the normal way. Vashmin and Kra. If your original intention was to go all the way inside, and you first came into the Heichal, almanas panim to come in almanas with the intention of going away inside. Lav mifsal ad demoti lifnim until you went all the way inside. Ve'im hachziro lachutz kosher. In other words, if you didn't fulfill your intention was to take it inside to the Kodesh Kodeshim, and you didn't do it, you only went into the Heichal, it doesn't become possible. Based on that, that's why it says you had to have kavanah. You had to do. If you had kavanah for the Heichal, that's fine, and you went in, that ruins it. If you had kavanah for the Kodesh Kodeshim, you went in, fine. But if you had kavanah for the Kodesh Kodeshim, you only went into the Heichal, that doesn't ruin it. Boy, Rava. Problem. What about karbanos? Listen carefully. What about a chatas? We've been talking about a chatas, a regular chatas that you bring outside the basement, outside in the azara, regular chatas, a kisbar sira, a chatas of a nasi, whatever it's whether it's a zocher or any of the regular chatas, the karbanos of tzibur, the regular karbanos of tzibur, they have no place inside there. If you bring the dam inside, that ruins the carbon. According to Rekiva, all karbanos that you bring inside ruin the carbon. According to Chamim, only a chatas, any kind of a chatas. What about a chatas which you normally bring inside the heichal? Like Param Davashel Tzibur. So like Mar says, Boy Rabba, Param Davashel Tzibur. The Sarvaras Kachavim. You also have Yom Kippur. We'll talk about Yom Kippurs. But a Param Davashel Tzibur, or a Parkom Mashiach for that matter, or a Sarvaras Kachavim. Shehichnis Daman Lifnai V'Lifnim. And you brought that inside this Kodesh Kodeshim Mahu. Right? You didn't, right? Why? Because you normally bring the carbon, these things are brought inside the Heichal, but not inside this Kodesh Kodeshim. Kodesh Kodeshim is only Yom Kippur, right? But what about these karbanas? Pam Davashel Tzibur, means Parkom Mashiach also, and a Sarvas Kachavim. And you brought that down inside the Kodesh Kodeshim Mahu. Miyamrin, do you say Ela Kodesh Panima? That says you shouldn't bring it into Heichal, you shouldn't bring it into the Kodesh Kodeshim. Kol Eicha, the Korean Ela Kodesh, whenever it's also to bring it into the Kodesh, into the Heichal, Korean Bay, we also say Korean Bay, Panima, then it's also bring it into the Kodesh Kodeshim. But Kol Eicha, the low Korean Ela Kodesh, is that the pasuk that talks about you shouldn't bring it into the Heichal cannot be talking about the Par HaMadavashel Tzibur or the Parsar of Yom Kippur, the Par of the Sar of Avodah Zarah. That if the Tzibur did Avodah Zarah, you bring the Sar there. You can't say, it can't be referring to that because those you're supposed to bring into the heichal, right? So you say like this again, kol echad dekrin el kodesh. Whenever you can't bring it into the heichal, then you can't bring it into the kodesh kodeshim. Kol echad the lo kodesh kodesh. But if there's no issur to bring it into kodesh, because you're supposed to offer it there, if it's a problem of shel tzibur or a sar, so maybe it's not also to bring it into kodesh kodeshim, meaning that wouldn't ruin it. It's not the proper thing to do, but it wouldn't ruin it. Oh, dilma shalom komenu. That's not the right place to do it. Where maybe the pasuk saying whenever you bring it into a place that you're not supposed to bring it into, in this case, the parham of you're supposed to bring it to the heichal, but not into the kodesh kodeshim. Maybe that would ruin it. He doesn't know. That's a good question. Imtim salomar shalom komenu. It's still the wrong place, and therefore you're chayiv, and it ruins the carbon. What about parvus Yom Kippur? Now the parvus Yom Kippur are supposed to be brought into the kodesh kodeshim, right? Right. So Yitaka took it into the Kodesh Kodeshim. Now you took it. What do you do with those korbanos? You first, remember we said 8 and 8. You first do it between the badim in the Kodesh Kodeshim. Then you come outside and you sprinkle it towards the paroches, right? And then you took out the hechal. Now you brought it back in. Now it has no place there, right? You already did the Paras Yom Kippur inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. Now you bring it inside to the hechal where you're supposed to sprinkle them, and then you took it back inside to the Kodesh Kodeshim. What would you say there? That is their place because you're supposed to bring it into Kodesh Kodeshim. Oh, Dilma, Hol v'Nafik, but once you left, you're done. Hol v'Nafik, Nafik. Once you're done, it has no place. You have no business going back in there, and that would ruin it. If you say, well, once you left it, it left it. What about hizam midaman al procha? So let's say you did the next step. You did the korban of the korban of Yom Kippur. You sprinkled it inside the Kodesh Kodeshim between the bottom. Then you came outside and you sprinkled it towards the parochas like you're supposed to do. And then what are you supposed to do? You take it towards the mizbeach hazav, the mizbeach haktoris, the mizbeach hapnimi, the one inside the heichal there. And you're supposed to do 7 times on top of the mizbeach, and then the 4 corners. And you took it outside of where the mizbeach stands, meaning between the mizbeach and the doorway and the shar. And then you brought it in between the mizbeach and towards the parochas. Now. It's one place. It's one big heichal there. Odilma yitzia karina bay, because it says votzia. You got to take it outside, meaning past the mizbeach. You go from the parochas towards the mizbeach. You go past the mizbeach towards the shar, and then once you took it past the mizbeach, you shouldn't take it back in towards the parochas, even though it's one big room. But it's still considered like you left that area. So would if you took it back in, would that ruin it? Would that ruin it? Would become puzzle like kol dama? Whereas with this pasuk of cholchatas sheyuva midama el mizbeach el cholchatas sheyuva midama. See, that's why you're supposed to read the pasuk inside. Don't guess. It's in Rav here. Kolchatas sheyuva midama el oel moed lechaper b'kodesh. Don't take it to a wrong place, and this is the wrong place. So even if you Yom Kippur, you did it inside the Kodesh Kodeshim properly. Then you did it in towards the parochas properly. Then you took it towards the mizbeach properly. But if you took it back between the area of the mizbeach and the parochas where you have no business going there, would that ruin it? That question stands teku. All right, tomorrow's Daf Pei Gimel will be on the podcast in Mitzvah Hashem. And on Sunday, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll start from the first Mishnah. There's 2 Mishnah. There's one long Mishnah. We'll start from the Mishnah on Pei Dalet. The Mishnah on Pei Dalet on Sunday's Daf. Shabbat Shalom l'kulam.